You know, even 23 years later, I still wake up screaming some nights. My hands still shake when I tell this story, but I need to get it out there. What happened to my partner and me out in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest changed everything I thought I knew about what truly exists out in the wild. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when we got the call. Hikers had reported hearing what sounded like a baby crying somewhere deep in the old growth section. The crying had been going on for hours, they said, and it didn't sound right, not like any animal they knew. My partner and I had been working these forests for over 15 years combined. We'd heard every sound the woods could make: elk bugling, coyotes howling, bears grunting, even cougars screaming. But this was different, according to the hikers. More human, but not quite human either. The group that reported it was a team of experienced backpackers, not the type of folks to panic over normal forest sounds. They tried to pinpoint the source, but couldn't get close enough before darkness forced them to retreat to their camp. The crying continued through the night, they said, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always there. We loaded up our gear and headed out around dawn. The trail was familiar, a 7-mile hike through some of the densest, most remote old-growth forests in the Pacific Northwest. Ancient Douglas firs and western red cedars towered over us, their canopy so thick that even at midday it felt like twilight underneath. About 3 miles in, we started to hear it. Faint at first, carried on the wind between the massive tree trunks, a mournful, heart-wrenching sound that squeezed your chest. Yeah, it sounded like a baby crying, but there was something off about it. The pitch was wrong, too deep somehow, and it lasted too long without the pauses you'd expect from a human infant. We followed the sound deeper into the woods, leaving the main trail and pushing our way through thick underbrush. The forest grew darker and more oppressive with every step. Moss hung from branches like tattered curtains, and our boots sank into decades of decaying leaves and fallen wood. The crying grew louder as we pushed through a stand of massive, old-growth cedars. Some of these trees were easily 8 feet across, their bark scarred and weathered by centuries of storms. We'd been hiking for nearly 2 hours when we finally saw it. Curled up at the base of a huge cedar, partially hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss, was something I still can't fully comprehend. It was small, maybe 3 feet tall, sitting upright with its knees pulled up to its chest. At first glance, it looked like a lost toddler in a dark winter coat. But as we got closer, the details became clear. The coat was actually thick, dark fur covering its entire body. The limbs were wrong, too long, too muscled for something so small. The hands and feet were huge, easily twice the size they should have been for a creature of that height. And the face, when it looked up at us, was a disturbing blend of human and something else entirely. The thing stopped crying when it saw us. Its eyes were large and dark, undeniably intelligent, but there was something wild and alien about them too. It made soft whimpering sounds and reached out to us with those enormous hands, just like any scared child would. My partner moved forward first. He'd always been good with kids, had 3 of his own back home. His instincts kicked in before his brain could process what he was actually looking at. The creature seemed genuinely distressed, alone, and helpless. We stood there debating what to do in hushed whispers while the thing continued to whimper and reach out to us. It was clearly abandoned or lost, and despite its appearance, it was acting like any scared, lonely child would. Every paternal instinct we had told us to help it. Against our better judgment, we decided to take it back to the ranger station. We figured the wildlife biologist could take a look, maybe figure out what it was, some kind of genetic anomaly perhaps, or a species we'd never encountered before. The Pacific Northwest is full of surprises. The creature didn't resist when my partner picked it up. It clung to him with surprising strength, wrapping those massive arms around his neck and pressing its face against his shoulder. It felt solid and real, warm and alive. Whatever it wasn't a hoax or a costume. As we started to head back toward the trail, I noticed something unsettling. The forest had gone completely silent. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, no insect hum. Even the wind seemed to have died. The only sound was our footsteps crunching through the underbrush and the occasional soft murmur from the creature in my partner's arms. The silence felt wrong. In all my years in these woods, I'd never experienced anything like it. The forest is never truly silent during the day. There's always something moving, calling, whispering through the leaves. This was the kind of silence that raises the hairs on your neck. About a half-mile from where we'd found the creature, we came across the first tracks. They were pressed deep into a patch of soft dirt near a small creek. And they were huge, easily 18 inches long and 7 inches wide, with distinct toe marks that looked almost human except for their size. The tracks were fresh, so fresh that water was still seeping into the deeper impressions. Whatever made them had passed through here recently, maybe within the last hour. The stride length was incredible, easily 8 feet between steps. My partner and I exchanged glances over the creature's head. We'd both seen plenty of bear tracks in our time, but these were different. The shape was wrong, and bears don't walk bipedally for any significant distance. These tracks showed a consistent two-legged gait. As we continued toward the trail, we found more disturbing evidence. A 20-foot section of trail had been ripped up, with massive chunks of dirt and rock scattered about. Several large Douglas fir saplings, easily 6 inches in diameter, had been snapped in half about 4 feet off the ground. The breaks were clean, as if something with incredible strength had simply grabbed them and twisted. Further on, we discovered the remains of what had been a young black bear. The carcass was maybe 50 yards off the trail, partially hidden behind a fallen log. What was left of it was mangled beyond recognition. The skull had been completely crushed, and the massive rib bones were shattered like firewood. Bears are powerful animals capable of incredible destruction when they need to be. But this level of devastation was beyond anything a bear could inflict, even on another bear. Whatever killed this animal possessed a strength far beyond anything that should exist in these woods. The creature in my partner's arms had gone very still when we discovered the bear's carcass. It wasn't making any noise, but I could feel it observing everything with those big, dark eyes. There was an intelligence there that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. About 3 miles from the ranger station, we heard the first call. It came from somewhere behind us, echoing through the trees like nothing I'd ever heard before. It wasn't exactly a howl, it wasn't exactly a roar. It was deeper than any animal sound I knew, with a resonant quality that seemed to vibrate in your chest. The creature in my partner's arms tensed immediately and let out a responding call. The sound was smaller, higher pitched, but unmistakably similar. It was trying to communicate with whatever had made the first sound. My partner tried to quiet the creature, but it called out again, even louder this time. The response came almost immediately, much closer than before. Whatever was out there was moving in our direction, and it was moving fast. We picked up our pace, but the calls continued. Each response was closer than the last. We could hear the sound of something large moving through the underbrush behind us, breaking branches and crushing vegetation under what had to be massive feet. The creature in my partner's arms had become almost frantic now, squirming and calling out constantly. My partner held it tight, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Whatever was coming for us didn't want us to take its young. That was perfectly clear now. We ran the last 2 kilometers to the ranger station. We could hear the thing behind us, staying just out of sight, but never falling back. We'd occasionally catch glimpses of movement between the trees, something large and dark, moving with impossible speed through the dense undergrowth. When we finally burst out of the woods and into the station clearing, the creature in my partner's arms had gone silent. It had given up struggling and just hung there, its big dark eyes staring back at the woods behind us. The calls from the forest had ceased too, but we could feel something out there, watching us from the shadows under the trees. We ran into the station and locked the door behind us. My partner gently put the creature on the floor, and it immediately curled up in a corner, huddling into a tight ball. It seemed to have given up entirely, as if it knew its real parent could never reach it here. I called our supervisor and tried to explain what we'd found. I could hear the skepticism in his voice, but he agreed to send a team. While we waited, my partner and I took turns watching out the windows. The forest surrounding the station seemed darker than usual, the shadows deeper. We couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting for its moment. An hour later, our supervisor arrived with a State Department wildlife biologist. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw the creature. The biologist approached slowly, his eyes widening with every step. He'd never seen anything like it, he said, in 30 years of studying wildlife in the region. The creature allowed the biologist to examine it, remaining docile but clearly terrified. He took measurements, photographs, even hair samples. All the while he muttered to himself, checking and rechecking his findings as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then the calls started coming from outside. First one, then another, then a third. They came from 3 different directions, surrounding the station. The calls were deep and powerful, shaking the windows in their frames. The creature in the corner began to respond, its small voice almost lost beneath the massive bellows from outside. The biologist went pale. Now we could all hear it, the sound of multiple large things moving around the building, staying just beyond the edge of the clearing. We'd occasionally catch glimpses of movement, dark, massive shapes slithering between the trees. My supervisor made a decision. He called for backup, requesting every available ranger and wildlife officer within a 50-mile radius. He also contacted the sheriff's office, asking for any assistance they could provide. In the meantime, we barricaded ourselves in the station, moving furniture against the doors and making sure every window was locked. The siege lasted for 3 hours. The creatures outside, and it was clear now there was more than one, never attacked directly. But they maintained constant pressure. They pushed against the walls hard enough to make the wood creak. They pounded on the roof hard enough to send dust falling from the ceiling. And the calls, those terrifying calls, never stopped. The creature inside remained in its corner, periodically responding to the calls from outside. It seemed torn between fear and a desire to reunite with its family. Sometimes it would creep towards the door as if wanting to go out, then retreat when the sounds became particularly intense. When the reinforcements finally arrived, at least a dozen vehicles converged on the station at once. The noise and lights finally scared the creatures away. We could hear them retreating into the forest, their calls fading into the distance. But the message had been clear. They weren't giving up their young without a fight. An emergency meeting was convened. Biologists, wildlife officers, rangers, even a couple of FBI agents who happened to be in the area investigating other matters, all gathered to discuss what to do with the creature we'd found. Opinions were divided. Some wanted to take it to a research facility, study it properly, maybe finally get answers about what these things really were. Others argued it was too dangerous, that the attacks from the adult creatures would only get worse if we took the young one away. The debate escalated throughout the afternoon. The little creature remained in its corner, watching everything with those dark, intelligent eyes. Occasionally it would call out softly, as if asking when it could go home. In the end, my partner made the decision for all of us. He grabbed the creature, wrapped it in a blanket, and announced he was taking it back into the woods. Some of the officers tried to stop him, but he ignored them. He walked out of the station, walked to the edge of the forest, and gently placed the creature on the ground. For a moment the creature just stood there, looking up at him with what almost seemed like gratitude. Then it turned and disappeared into the shadows under the trees, moving with a speed and agility surprising for something that had looked so much like a helpless human child. We waited in silence. 5 minutes later, we heard the calls from the forest. But this time they were different, filled with what could only be described as relief and joy. The calls retreated deeper into the woods, growing fainter until they finally faded away completely. My partner turned to the assembled group. "There are things in these woods we don't understand," he said quietly. "Things we may never be meant to understand. The best we can do is respect them, stay out of their way, and pray they do the same for us." That night I wrote up my official report on the incident. I included every detail, every observation, every measurement we had taken. I attached the photographs the biologist had taken, though they came out blurry and inconclusive. My report was filed and classified. It was never allowed to become public record. The brass called it a fast track to ridicule and a public relations disaster. Better to let the matter fade quietly, they said. Better to pretend it never happened. But it did happen, and it changed everything for those of us who were there. My partner retired 6 months later. He couldn't stand to be in those woods anymore, knowing what was out there. The biologist continued to work, but never spoke publicly about what he saw that day. His career would have been over instantly if he had. As for me, I continued to work as a ranger for another 10 years. But everything was different after that day. Every sound in the forest would make me freeze and listen. Every distant call, every snapped branch, every moment of unnatural silence would make me remember those 3 hours at the ranger station, surrounded by things that shouldn't exist. I saw evidence more times than I can count. More tracks, more destroyed trees, more animals killed with injuries that no known predator could inflict. But I never saw the creatures up close again. I wonder if they're deliberately avoiding us, if they remember us as the people who finally returned their young. The truth is, we never should have picked that little creature up out of the woods. As human-like as it seemed, as scared and alone as it appeared, it belonged to another world, a world that touches ours only in the deepest, darkest places of the forest. A world that has its own rules, its own creatures, its own dangers. Now I live in the city, hundreds of miles from those woods, but I still dream of that little face looking up at me from under that ancient cedar. I still hear those calls echoing through the trees, deeper than any known animal, vibrating in my chest like a heartbeat, and sometimes, late at night, I wonder if the creature we helped rescue is still out there somewhere. I hope she is. I hope she's with her family, growing strong in the depths of the forest where she belongs. But most of all, I hope she never encounters humans again. Because next time, she might not be lucky enough to meet someone who understands enough to let her go. The forest holds many secrets. Some are beautiful, some are terrifying, and some, like the creature we found that September day 23 years ago, are both at once. But all of them deserve respect. All of them deserve to be left alone in the wild places they still claim as their own. Because the moment we lose our fear and reverence for the unknown, the moment we decide everything must be studied, catalogued, and explained, we lose something essential about our relationship with the natural world. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some creatures are meant to stay in the shadows, and some forests, no matter how well we think we know them, will always be wild in ways we will never fully understand. If you ever find yourself in the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest and you hear a sound that chills you to the bone, a cry that sounds almost but not quite human, I implore you to do what we should have done: turn away, go back to the trail, go back to civilization, and let the things in the shadows remain in the shadows where they belong. Because not all lost creatures need to be rescued, not everything that cries needs to be comforted, and not everything wild needs to be tamed. The forest takes care of itself. It always has. It always will. Our part is simply to be wise enough to let it. 23 years later, I can still see those dark eyes looking at me. I can still feel the weight of that small form in my arms when my partner passed her to me for a moment. I can still hear those massive, resonant calls from the depths of the forest, and the small, sharp reply of the creature we had tried to save. No ranger who was there that day can forget it. It is seared into our memory, a reminder that there are forces in the natural world that elude our understanding and control. A reminder that human arrogance has limits, and that those limits are often found in the places where civilization meets true wilderness. I tell this story now because I need to warn others. I need you to understand that the unknown isn't always friendly, but it often deserves our respect. And most of all, I need you to know that if you ever find yourself facing something you can't explain, something that defies all categories of what is possible, your first response should not be to capture it or study it. Your first response should be to back away slowly, to acknowledge that you have entered territory that is not yours, and to retreat with the humility that comes from knowing there are still forces in this world larger than ourselves. The forest is older than us, it is deeper than our understanding. And in its darkest, most remote corners live things that our ancestors knew well enough to fear and respect, but that we in our modern era have largely forgotten. That day in September 23 years ago, we were reminded, and that reminder changed everything. I hope my story can serve as a warning to others so they don't have to learn the same lesson the hard way. Some creatures of the forest are meant to remain mysteries. Some calls from the deep should never be answered, and some woods, no matter how familiar we think they are, will always be wilder than we can imagine. Remember that. Respect it. And when you are in the deep woods, listen not just to what you can hear, but also to what the silence is telling you. Because sometimes silence is the voice of the forest warning you that you have ventured too far into territory that is not yours. That day, my partner and I didn't hear that warning until it was almost too late. We learned our lesson. I wish others could learn from our mistake without having to live through the terror of being surrounded by creatures that shouldn't exist, calling out in the night for their lost young that we had torn from its home. The forest is still there. The creatures are still there. And when the wind blows through those ancient cedars and firs, you can still sometimes hear their calls, deep and resonant, reminding anyone who listens that there is more to this world than our textbooks and scientists are willing to admit. Go there if you must, but go with respect. Go with humility. And go knowing that if you find something you cannot explain, the wise answer is not to try and take it or understand it. The wise answer is to bow your head in respect, to back away slowly, and to leave it be. Because some mysteries exist not to be solved, but to remind us that there is still wonder in the world. There is still terror, and there are still things that are larger than us. The little creature we found that day was one of those things, and the massive creatures that came to claim her were reminders that the forest has its own guardians, its own laws, and its own way of protecting what is theirs. We were lucky to escape with nothing more than our lives and this story. Others might not be so fortunate, so pay attention, and if you ever hear a cry in the deep woods that sounds almost but not quite human, do not go investigating. Do not try to help. Just turn away. Because that cry might be a trap, a lure, or more likely it might be exactly what it sounds like, the call of something young and lost. But either way, it is none of our business. The forest takes care of its own. It always has. And our interference, no matter how well-intentioned, only brings trouble. This is the lesson I learned 23 years ago in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. It is a lesson I have carried with me every day since, and it is a lesson I share now with anyone who will listen, in the hope that it might save someone from the terror I experienced and give them the wisdom to know when to let the mysteries of the forest remain mysteries. The world is stranger than we know. The forest is deeper than we measure. And in its darkest corners, ancient things still move, still call, still protect their territory and their young with strength that defies belief. Respect them, fear them if you must, but above all, leave them be, because some things in this world are never meant to be understood. They are only meant to be respected from a safe distance, with the humility that comes from knowing there are forces in nature that remain beyond our control and comprehension. And those forces, those creatures, those mysteries, deserve their space in the wild forest as much as we deserve our space in our cities and towns. That is the truth I learned 23 years ago. It is a truth that has shaped the rest of my life. And it is a truth I share now, with all the sincerity and urgency I can muster, with anyone who spends time in the deep, wild places where the human world touches the world of the unknown. Stay safe out there, stay respectful, and when you hear things you cannot explain, let them remain unexplained, because that is often the wisest choice of all. Now the story continues, but diverges into another account, so I will keep the remaining parts faithful to the original text, continuing the translation and adaptation. 3 years after that incident, I had moved to work at a different station, trying to leave the memories behind. But the forest has a way of keeping its secrets, and those secrets have a way of following you. I started hearing reports from other rangers, other forest workers, all whispering about similar encounters, creatures that shouldn't exist, calls that don't match any known animal, tracks that are too big, too human-like, too impossible. The ranger community is small and trust is rare, but slowly, over the years, I found others who had seen similar things. We'd share our stories in hushed tones late at night when no one else could hear. And from those shared stories, a pattern emerged. The creatures weren't isolated to the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. They were all over the Pacific Northwest, in the northern Cascades, in the Cascade Mountains, in remote places where few humans venture and where old-growth forest still dominates the landscape. Some of my colleagues had had closer encounters than mine. One had been pursued for 3 miles by something that moved through the dense undergrowth faster than he could run on a clear trail. Another had found a campsite trashed, tents torn, gear scattered, but no trace of the campers. The bodies were never found. The official investigation concluded a bear was responsible, but my colleague knew better. The claw marks were too large, too widely spaced, and the damage was too deliberate and methodical to be the work of a bear. The most disturbing story came from a veteran ranger who had worked these woods for 40 years. He told me about a group of hikers in the 1970s who reported being stalked for days by something that stayed just out of sight. They could hear it moving through the woods around their camp every night. They'd occasionally catch glimpses of a massive upright figure among the trees. On the last night before they managed to get out of the woods, the thing came close enough for them to see it clearly in the light of their campfire. They described a creature over 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, with eyes that reflected the firelight like an animal's, but with a face that was disturbingly human in its structure. It stood at the edge of their campsite for what felt like an eternity, simply watching them. Then, without warning, it let out a roar that shook the ground beneath their feet and disappeared into the darkness. The hikers left first thing in the morning and never returned to those woods. Their report was filed and forgotten, dismissed as mass hysteria or overactive imagination, but the ranger who investigated their camp found evidence that backed up their story. Massive footprints, trees ripped from the ground, and a smell he described as rotten musk that clung to the area for days afterward. These accounts, and dozens of others like them, painted a picture of something that lives in the most remote regions of our forests. Something that is primarily nocturnal, enormously strong, surprisingly intelligent, and that generally avoids human contact. But when humans encroach too deeply into their territory, or when their young are threatened, these creatures will respond with aggression that can be terrifying. What unnerves me the most is how organized they seem. The multiple individuals who responded when we took the little creature, the way they coordinated their movements around the ranger station, the different calls that seemed to communicate specific information. It all suggests a level of social intelligence comparable to great apes, or possibly even higher. If these creatures are indeed as intelligent as they seem, then their ability to remain hidden from modern science for so long is even more impressive. They are not just animals operating on instinct. They are thinking beings capable of reasoning, planning, and complex social behavior. That makes them far more dangerous than any common predator could be, but also far more fascinating. Over the years, I've developed my own theory about these creatures. I believe they are a relic species, a survivor from an earlier era when larger, more powerful life forms roamed North America. Somehow they managed to adapt as their habitat dwindled, becoming more nocturnal, more elusive, refining their ability to avoid human contact. Their relative scarcity, which is likely a result of being at the top of the food chain, with a huge territory required per individual, means that encounters are rare. But when they do occur, they leave lasting impressions on those who experience them. The official denial of their existence makes sense from a management perspective. Imagine the chaos if the government acknowledged the existence of unknown large primates in our national forests. Tourism would plummet. Logging companies would demand compensation. Animal rights groups would demand massive habitat protections. Trophy hunters would flock to the woods, and thrill seekers would endanger not only their own lives, but potentially provoke creatures that are best left alone. So the silence continues. Reports are filed away or dismissed. Witnesses are discredited or ignored, and the creatures continue to exist in the blank spaces on the map, in the places where few humans venture and where wilderness still reigns supreme. Now, 23 years later, I've made my peace with what I saw. I've accepted that there will probably never be official recognition, never scientific studies, never definitive answers. These creatures exist in the limbo between myth and reality, and perhaps that is where they need to remain. What I can say for sure is this: the forest is more complex and mysterious than most people imagine. It contains wonders and terrors in equal measure, and those of us who spend our lives working in these wild lands know that there are truths the wider world is not ready to accept. So we keep our secrets. We tell our stories in hushed tones to those we trust. And we continue to do our jobs, protecting these forests and the countless forms of life they contain, both those that are officially recognized and those that are not. If you ever find yourself in the deep woods and something tells you that you shouldn't be there, listen to that instinct, back away. Respect the territory of creatures that were here long before us and will be here long after we are gone. And if you ever find something you cannot explain, something that defies your understanding of what is possible, consider the possibility that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Consider that perhaps true wisdom lies not in exposing every secret, but in knowing when to let the unknown remain unknown. That is the most important lesson I learned on that September day 23 years ago, and it is a lesson that has shaped every day of my life since. The forest guards its secrets jealously, and perhaps, just perhaps, that is exactly how it should be. Because in a world where almost everything has been explored, mapped and catalogued, there is a certain comfort in knowing that there are still places where mystery reigns. There are still creatures that refuse to be defined by human science, and there are still experiences that defy easy explanation. Those places, those creatures, those experiences remind us that we are not as powerful or as knowledgeable as we sometimes believe. They remind us that the natural world still has tricks up its sleeve, still has lessons to teach us, if only we are humble enough to listen. So here I am, 23 years later, still processing what I saw, still trying to figure out how it fits into my understanding of the world. And the conclusion I've come to is this: I don't need to understand it completely. I don't need to prove it to anyone else. I don't need science to validate it. I know what I experienced, I know what I saw, and that knowledge, along with the respect it has instilled in me for the mysteries of the forest, is enough. If my story resonates with you, if you've had your own encounters with the inexplicable, then you know what I'm talking about. And if you're skeptical, if you think this is all just the imagination of a stressed-out ranger, that's okay too. I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm just here to share my truth as best as I can. The forest still calls to me sometimes. I don't work there anymore, but I still feel the pull, the need to be among those ancient trees, to listen to the silence that only the deep forest can provide. But I go now with a different perspective. I go as a visitor, not an authority. I go with respect, not arrogance. And I go knowing that there are residents in that forest who have as much right to be there as I do, if not more. Perhaps someday the truth about these creatures will come to light. Perhaps eventually there will be evidence that cannot be dismissed or ignored. Perhaps science will find a way to study them without destroying their ability to remain hidden, without turning them into objects of curiosity or fear. But until that day, if it ever comes, they remain as they have always been, in the shadows, in the spaces between the known and the unknown, in the last true wild places left in our increasingly domesticated world. And maybe, just maybe, that is exactly how it should be. Because the world needs mystery. It needs places we cannot fully explain. It needs creatures that refuse to fit neatly into our categories. Because those mysteries, those places, those creatures keep us humble. They remind us that for all we have learned, there is still so much more we do not know. And in that humility, in that recognition of the limits of our knowledge, lies the key to a healthier relationship with the natural world. So I end this story where it began, with the sound of a baby crying in the deep woods, and with the decision my partner and I made to investigate. Was it the right decision? Did we save a creature that needed saving? Or did we simply cause unnecessary chaos by interfering with something we didn't understand? Those questions have haunted me for 23 years, and they will likely haunt me until the day I die. But if I had to do it again, knowing everything I know now, I think I would make the same decision. Not because it was necessarily the right thing to do, but because it was what my human empathy and my training dictated. The eventual outcome, returning the creature to its family, felt like the only possible solution once we understood what we were facing. And therein lies perhaps the true lesson of it all. Sometimes the right choice isn't the one dictated by textbooks or training. Sometimes the right choice is to listen to your gut, to read the situation in front of you, and to have the courage to make a decision that others might question. My partner had that courage when he returned that little creature to the woods. And though it cost us our careers in a sense, though it made us outcasts among our peers, I have never doubted that he did the right thing. Sometimes preserving the mystery is more important than solving the mystery. Sometimes letting go is wiser than holding on. And sometimes the greatest strength lies in recognizing that there are forces in the world that are beyond our control or comprehension, and having the humility to step back and let them be. That is my story. That is my truth. And if it serves only as a warning to others, or as a comfort to those who have had their own encounters with the inexplicable, then it will have been worth the courage it took to share it. The forest waits, with all its mysteries intact, and somewhere in its depths, I believe the little creature we helped rescue still lives, grown and strong now, perhaps with its own young to protect. And that is as it should be. Because the forest takes care of its own. It always has. It always will. Our part is simply to have the wisdom to let it. For more interesting stories, check this out.